introduction, and thank you all for being here to join us for this CEO panel session. I'll read the title because it is really interesting. It's Tackling Europe's Security of Energy Supply, Resiliency and Climate Goals in Uncertain Times. And I think that's probably one of the biggest understatements I've ever heard. So, uncertain times, we just heard about the direction the EU has been taking for the past several years in terms of the Green Deal and the Fit for 55. Who would have thought that 2 years after our last gathering together, we would have seen a global pandemic and a land war in Europe, which has rather changed things. So, to add to our challenges facing the climate challenge and the pandemic, we now have a crisis, a man-made crisis, we say, which has changed everything yet again. And again, as we've just heard, the three issues being addressed in the Repower Europe, the diversification of resources, the focus more on renewable energy, and I think particularly of interest to this panel will be the focus on increased energy efficiency, are going to be major concerns for the cogeneration industry. So I'm joined here by 5 distinguished guests from different companies involved in the energy industry and cogeneration in particular. Have Vladimír Hlavinka, who apologized earlier for his Christian name, no relation, from TEDOM. Hans Holmström from Siemens Energy. Yep. Carl Richards from INNIO. Michel Delanaye from MITIS. And Enzo Bellavigna from AD Energy. So thank you all. And if I could maybe ask you each in turn to give us a brief introduction to yourself and your company. The detailed bios are in the program, I think. But if I could just ask you maybe to say a few words about your company to start us off.
Yeah, so at INNIO Jenbacher, we produce basically gas engine-based cogeneration solutions, running on both biogenic fuels, biogas, but also landfill, sewage gas, wood gas, to name a more exotic one, but also capable of operating on hydrogen, as we've demonstrated 2 years ago already, to show the role of cogeneration in the future, and power ranging from 300 kilowatt up to 10 megawatts per unit.
AB is a manufacturing company with engineering and service capabilities. We have 2 primary product lines. One is CHP solutions on a scale between 500 kW and 5 megawatt. And the second one is a system that upgrades biogas into biomethane. It's a company that operates in 22 countries, in 4 continents, and we are 1,300 people, roughly.
All right. Representing Siemens Energy, which is really a spin-off from Siemens AG 2 years ago. We're listed on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange, and it's basically the power-related activities of former Siemens that was spun off 2 years ago. We're active in many fields, more than I can list in a few minutes, but power generation definitely through steam turbines and gas turbines, and also we own 2/3 of Siemens Gamesa Wind, so that's part of our portfolio. We have everything from electrolyzers to heat pumps, transmission equipment and systems. We dabble a bit with storage and carbon capture as well. So we're really quite a broad scope, I would say. Roughly 90,000 people around the globe, turnover of about 30 million euros. So we're really looking forward to all these transition talks. We've already seen a lot of action being taken by customers and others because of the transition. But I think we'll come back to that a little bit later.
Okay, TEDOM, we celebrate 30 years last year. This company is not only a packager of cogeneration. Yeah, we use an engine from MAN, MW, MTU for all gases. Yeah, we have a big service team. The biggest one is in Germany, for example, Czech Republic, Poland, operating in 40 countries. Next one, what was started last year, it was a trading with electricity. Our main goal to offer our customer additional value added. Yeah, that means if you buy the cogeneration, we should operate. You need only heat. Yeah, we will operate this. We will supply you gas, buy electricity from you. That is a part of the TEDOM operation with trading with gas and electricity. Next part, it's especially in this time, it is very important to offer some changing of the gas, changing at the heat pump, at the photovoltaic, yeah? And it's our EPC business. And last but not least, we produce our own engines, TEDOM engines, yeah? And we are very active in the Reman business. We provide this Reman business to MAN, MWM, MTU, and this part, it's not only packager, it's so-called all value added what we think that our customer need.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm Michel Delanaye, so I'm the CEO of MITIS. So obviously I'm the little guy because my company is only 14 people. So we are a startup located in Liège in Belgium, and so we are focusing on the development on small micro-turbine systems for combined heat and power. So we are developing a 10 kilowatt electric system, which is a compact turbo generator design actually, with patented flameless combustion. So that technology of flameless combustion is quite interesting because it can ensure, to have very low emissions when you combust basically fossil fuels or whatever you combust, but also you can do really multi-fuels. So we are looking at many different fuels. Our system is actually using, for example, gas foil bearings, no lubrication, so no oil in the system, which is very interesting for the type of customers that we are targeting. So essentially, we're looking at small tertiary sectors, for example, rest houses. So they need a lot of heat, and today they're really suffering, in fact, or swimming pools or hotels and things like this. And one of the major aspects is low TCO, basically, which means low maintenance. So we are developing this. So we have a lot of support from the European Commission. For example, we received an accelerator project in 2020, right in the middle of the COVID, but it was a very important project for us for developing the technology. We are close to the proof of concept, so we're still in development because I have to admit it's quite difficult things to develop. But so we'll move in actually probably in the market by end of 2023 and beginning of 2024.
Thank you. That's very interesting, the focus on the much smaller technologies. Now that's, if I can come back to that in a minute and talk about the impact of that much smaller scale technology on the consumers and the customer relationships. But I can maybe start with the larger scale, or not more sophisticated, larger range of technologies that Siemens offer, and just in the context of the situation we've described in terms of the Repower EU and the existing Fit for 55 and the Green Deal, just how you feel that impacts on your business, and on the other hand, also how your business can contribute to the decarbonisation goals in the context of what is now, shall I say, a more immediate emergency.
Yeah, it has been, since we are doing business all around the globe, of course, the fact that there are sanctions towards Belarus and Russia have absolutely stopped all that business completely. But we also see that in other parts of the world there is tremendous now speed in producing more, especially natural gas in LNG form. Everybody realizes that Europe needs natural gas quickly, and we see a lot of expansion in the Middle East as an example, but also in North America. So that's an immediate impact on the business, of course, on the part of the business where we serve the oil and gas market. But we also see a tremendously grown interest in decarbonized solutions because of this. I think the fact that we have a gas shortage and we have a gas price increase or crisis even, I would say, really puts a lot more focus on decarb solutions. And we see that in Europe. We saw a lot of action in Europe also before the war, but especially now after the war, there's a lot more focus on what can we do without fossil fuels in total. And this is where, we're trying to continue and push our decarbonization of the portfolio, meaning selling solutions to customers that are future-proof, that can be transformed over time when they have access to whatever biofuels or hydrogen or whatever, that they won't be sitting on a dead asset, but rather be able to transform the current assets into something that works also in a fossil-free environment. As a matter of fact, almost all of the gas turbine customers that we are dealing with today, from all over the world, are asking the mandatory question: can you guys make this thing burn hydrogen, and how much and how fast? And the answer that we normally have is that when you have the hydrogen, we will be able to burn it. No worries. Actually, today we promise up to 75% co-firing of hydrogen with natural gas, and we think that within a couple of years we have proven that 100% is working fine. It's a challenge because we're working with a dry, low emission technology, which means we don't use any water consumption for this combustion process. So, but it's looking very good. So all in all, to answer your question, all these changes and challenges for companies and households and humanity is really growing our business, I have to say.
So really what you're saying is that the challenge is accelerating the transition that was happening anyway in terms of decarbonisation and yes, giving you a few more incentives to perform even better. It's really interesting. I think if I could maybe move to you, Vladimír, because you were saying over lunch that you also have operations in many countries, not just in Europe. And one of the immediate impacts of this was that you no longer have an operation in Russia for obvious reasons. I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on the same kind of issues that Hans has been addressing in terms of the relationship between what you can contribute to the transition, but also what other impacts the transition is having on your business as an energy supplier as well.
So for us, it's challenging from this point of view that so in the past it was only cogeneration and a little bit cheaper heat and some electricity. Yeah. And just now, because the price of gas, price of electricity, the customers start all over the world start thinking another way. Yeah. They wanted to combine. Yeah, it's not only the price. Yeah, it's some kind of independence to be independent. Yeah, not to be dependent only to the grid. Yeah, not to be dependent to the gas grid. Yeah, to have their opportunity to produce their electricity. Yeah, and to count to the money. Yeah. And it's challenging for us here because just now it's not about the technical parameters of cogeneration, it's technical parameters of the system. It's a first challenge, yeah? And it's the same all over the world, yeah? If you supply cogeneration for the greenhouse which is producing the cannabis in America, yeah, or if you supply some so-called small cogeneration supports or service system services in Italy, it's the same. Yeah. Second challenge because these equipment must work together. Yeah, it's not possible to supply only the cogeneration. Yeah, you have to supply cogeneration and to be able to connect with something. Yeah, with some higher system, IT system, digitalization. To be able, for example, to optimize on the price of electricity, price of the heat. Yeah, and sometimes, yeah, with big investor developer of the industrial park, just now they are asking to optimize to the production of carbon. Yeah. So and next one, it's if you have this opportunity, yeah, if you supply you deliver your cogeneration photovoltaic to the small customer. Yeah, there is no sense only to be independent, working like an island version. Yeah, you have to offer to be part of some virtual power plant. Yeah, because in this virtual power plant you have a better position on the market with electricity. Yeah, you should sell the electricity on the highest price. Yeah, this is free challenge what we have just now and facing, but it's the same in Germany, Czech Republic, Poland, America, Italy, France, everywhere.
Yeah, and it's interesting you raised the issue about flexibility and sort of additional values into the system. But I guess that one of the things which is sort of fundamental to cogeneration is the issue of efficiency. And I think it's been a frustration for many, well, for most of the people in the room, that when you look at the production of electricity from thermal plants, that we're throwing away 2/3 of the primary energy. And that if we were able to capture that, I think it's equivalent in most countries to the total heat demand from those countries. So if we could only integrate the systems better, we would actually have a more efficient and more cost-effective system. If I can maybe bring that onto you, the sort of the perspective that you have in terms of the challenges that you face in what seems to be a bit of a no-brainer. You know, why don't we have cogeneration for all thermal power generation? I mean, I think we all understand what some of the reasons are, but if you maybe just give your perspective on how you see yourselves addressing that challenge going forward.
I think there's a couple of challenges there. One has mainly maybe been overcome, and that's maybe one of the only good aspects of the current crisis, and that's the point that energy has become valuable again, which it wasn't for decades. I think that's really probably the only positive aspect of the crisis, that there's been a new perception on the value of energy. So that topic, I would say, has almost been overcome, the value of energy and therefore the value of efficiency. The other obstacles, from my perspective, are for investors the lack of planability. And I think that's the big ask to policy, that we don't need more stringent targets. And I'm not saying these targets are not needed, but what we also need is a clear roadmap of how to get there, so planability. And without that, the business cases are insecure. Then there's more regulation, more boundary conditions that need to be met, boundary conditions that today are very difficult to foresee. One example, the hydrogen readiness or retrofitability to hydrogen, for example, that in Germany, in the draft of the cogeneration law, is an aspect which basically requires commitments for the price of the future retrofit to hydrogen before we even know what the norms and regulations are on a hydrogen-fired power plant. And that's totally impossible to achieve, both for an investor and also for a producer of the equipment. And I think there's so much complexity being added from the policy side rather than making it easier to invest. And it almost feels like we're ignoring the fact that we're steering towards a huge gap in residual power that we need. And people are forgetting that gas-fired generation will be needed to close that gap, and ideally that's cogeneration located where you also have a heat demand and operated flexibly. And I think that's our responsibility, that we need to communicate this new role of cogeneration being 100% electricity market focused. So the units only run if there's an undersupply of electricity on the grid. And then the waste heat is being used, and that waste heat will continue to have a value even after electrifying heat, because it will then reduce electricity consumptions for heat pumps that would otherwise need to run. And if we manage to get that role across, and at the same time policy realizes the need to create boundary conditions that people start to invest into these distributed parts again, then I think we're moving in the right direction. At the moment, I rather see a stop on building out capacity. And there's so many examples of policy interventions that are totally going in the wrong direction from our perspective. When we're looking at the targets for decarbonization, then the need for biogenic gases to do that. And instead of going for the efficient solutions, which would be using the gas where it is available and where you have a heat and electricity demand, and you could do that in a flexible biogas plant. Instead, we're pushing the gas to biomethane, which makes a lot of sense for other plants where you don't have a local heat and electricity demand. Totally good to then go via biomethane and put it into the grid. But what's happening, because policy is driving wrong incentive schemes, is that the biogas that could be used for flexible heat and power generation is reformed to biomethane, takes away 15% at least of the energy, then liquefied, drops efficiency even further, and then used in trucking. Yeah? And at the same time, we're asking people to burn diesel to generate power and heat. Now that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it?
So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting perspective because what you're really talking about is the integration of energy vectors on a local level. I think there's actually a session tomorrow about the impact on local energy systems, but I think that the key part of this is the integration and you optimize the utilization of resources by local integration, and that's something you can do with engine-based CHP, for example, which is more difficult through central plants at big cities. Yeah, thank you. I think another perspective from a manufacturer, because I think that it's not just about the products you produce, but it's actually the impact of the energy crisis on your own business in terms of production facilities. I wonder if you'd like to comment on that. I had a note here saying that you don't have 50,000 production facilities, you have 50,000 square meters.
Unfortunately, I would have loved.
Okay.
Maybe too much to manage,
but still a significant amount of space to have it very powerful. So, I mean, from a manufacturer's perspective, what are your thoughts on the impacts of the crisis?
I think we have seen an impact on 3 levels: suppliers, customers, and ourselves as manufacturers. So suppliers, I believe we have been used to work in a stable and certain environment, and stability and uncertainty have taken the pace since the pandemic, and now even more with the war. And supply chains have become unstable, at least ours. So a lot of our suppliers have started increasing prices with giving a notice of few days. Many of them give us proposals and offers that are valid for 30 days, sometimes even shorter, 7 days. So I think this has created an incredible snowball that arrives directly to the customers, because of course instability and uncertainty at the supply chain level cannot be sustained. And this is also why we have inflation, which is probably driven a lot by speculation. And afterwards, maybe Jeremy, I have some comments also on a macroeconomic level, because this inflation speculation thing, it's fascinating to discuss. But to answer your question, so suppliers, customers, I think we see different impact in different countries. We have, for example, a lot of industrial customers that use our solutions burning methane, natural gas. And some of them were forced to be stopped. I'm talking about European customers, some food companies, some ceramics. And there are others, on the contrary, that due to a spark spread that is even improved, are accelerating the return on investment. So basically investing in cogeneration has a return on investment that can be counted in, say, 24 months. So previously, we were used to see customers making investment decisions in CHP when there was, say, 3 years, 3.5 here. Now, in some cases, it has even accelerated. The main issue at the customer level to me is uncertainty, because especially European customers, when they have to invest in something that is related to gas, face such a level of uncertainty, because they read the news, they watch television. I mean, they're at the end common people. So I think one of the things in which the European community can give support not only to the 70 million households in Europe, but to the millions of micro, small, medium-sized, big customers is to give more certainties about the fact that yes, we will have the sources of gas, and we can comment afterwards about this. The third level is the third level of impact is ourselves. So we were forced to increase prices 3 times in the last 2 years, and for certain product lines so high as 40% compared to the previous prices. It's of course a big risk, because we are out there competing with other companies, and some of our competitors, I don't know how, they were able to contain the price increase to lower levels. But I think this is something that is part of the period that we are in. We have also decided to invest into biomethane before the pandemic and before the war. And biomethane can be partially, of course, to the solution of being more independent to the Russian gas, because, say, in 20 years, Europe today imports 90% of gas, 45% of which before the war was coming from Russia. And in 20 years, 1/3 of the European consumption of gas can be substituted with biomethane, which is green, is cheaper, of course, at the current prices of gas. So I understand, of course, there is a need to integrate different fuels and different technologies, but really biomethane can be an answer to this kind of issues.
Yeah, and I guess that it addresses one of the issues that you said about it's not just the absolute cost, it's the uncertainty and stability and the independence. I wonder if I could come to you, as Michel, as the kind of the other end of the scale, the very small consumers, the small medium enterprises, those kind of organisations. I wonder if you'd like to sort of add your thoughts on that issue about cost versus stability.
So it's a little bit like the two other people actually what they talked about. So for us, so we're focusing on like 10, 20 kilowatt, and so it means it's relatively small, I would say, customers. Like I was taking the example of a rest home, for example, rest house. So you have like a heating system which is 400 kilowatts, something like this, or 2 times 400 kilowatts. So they're eating all the time, and so today what they're basically facing is that. They've seen this huge increase of natural gas price, because most of them actually they're running natural gas. Because in the past, there were government incentives actually which say, let's go to the natural gas. It's going to be lower emissions. So they give incentives for you to buy heating systems. So they have 2 big Wisman heating, and so they see the big spike of this increase of energy cost. And at the same time, they see also, the electricity price, which is increasing so much. And in fact, they would like to go, renewable, for example. They would like to have as much as possible renewable, would say, input into their heat or in their electricity. And usually what they have done is they put photovoltaics because they had, also incentive to do so. But photovoltaics at a certain possibility, so you have a certain size of the roof. Once you filled up all the roof, it's done. So, and the problem is that the sun actually is giving, during the summertime, but in the winter time, this is when you need your heat, and so where this is coming. So they're looking for solutions. So, unfortunately, we don't have the machine yet because we're still in a proof of concept. But if we would have those, actually, they would just, we could sell them, a lot actually. So what they are facing is this problem, of I would say this increase of energy, and I think there is a huge possibility of penetrating the market with cogeneration into these particular sectors. There's plenty of opportunities there. Each time we see a prospect, actually, they are interested. They want something also which is, I would say, easy to use. And so sometimes the problem, and I would say one of our competition is the piston engines, indeed. Not really yours because you're too big. So it's smaller piston engines. Okay. But so they are confronted also to the problem of maintenance. And one of the problems we actually see into this small business is the service. Where you have actually contract services, then the customers are happy, even with piston engines. But when it is sold, for example, without contracts, and it's just an installer that comes and installs the machine, then it's very dangerous. And it's like a burning field actually for cogeneration, because the machine is not working, maintenance is not performed correctly, and so the customer is not happy. So he tells his buddy, friend that, look, cogeneration you should not use because it's always, not working. And so that's very bad. So one thing we have to be very careful into our business, actually, when we sell small machines, is that we are sure that they are running like a heating system. So it's not like the big machines. The big machines is sure that they will be running well because you will have contract services. But the small ones is different. So anyway, so in the small, I would say, business sectors, I think there is huge opportunities to deploy this technology, where you have some heating demand, of course. And it's not like you mentioned, it's essentially for heat. So you produce heat, and at the same time you produce electricity, which is low cost. And especially if we can bring them some fuels which are from renewable base, that would be great. And for the moment, as you explained, the problem is the system. The grid is not there to provide renewable fuel. So liquid biofuels or something else, whatever, but renewable based fuel. So we need to be able to provide to them, and they will be interested. It's
interesting, yes. It's the sort of chicken and egg thing, isn't it? You need the technology to use the fuel, but then you need the fuel to invest in the energy system. There may be some other comments on that. But thank you all for those contributions. That gives us plenty of fuel for thought. So I'm going to open up the session now to questions from the audience. I think there is a wandering mic somewhere over there. So if anyone would like to ask a question of the panel, please say who you'd like to address it to, or whether it's just a general question to all the panel. The fuel supply side of things, because I was talking to somebody over lunch about maybe the assumption that we depend on a gas distribution infrastructure, and that's not the only way of using logistics structures for distributing renewable fuels. So I wonder if there's anyone who'd like to comment on the idea of, for example, using different transport mechanisms, bottled gas fuels and so on, or whether you think that it's mainly a focus on the gas distribution infrastructure that's the challenge to renewable fuels. Wonder if any of you'd like to comment on that, or is it hydrogen? I mean, hydrogen seems to come up a lot on that.
I mean, that's a constant, let's say, challenge with the new fuels. Maybe not the liquid biofuels, because they are very similar to normal diesel in many aspects. But hydrogen, as an example, it's enormously complicated to transport if you want to do it efficiently, and that's why many people are looking at ammonia as a means of actually transporting hydrogen and cracking it just before you burn it in some engine or gas turbine or whatever. So the infrastructure is lacking for transport of the renewables in general. I mean, the gas infrastructure can be used for lower percentages of hydrogen just to be mixed into natural gas. That works well. But as soon as you start to come really into higher percentages of hydrogen, you need a different kind of infrastructure. So it's quite. Thank you.
So it's quite challenging, and it's not only the fuel infrastructure challenges that we meet. Also, if you look at transmission and distribution grids of electricity, are, as we speak, being rebuilt quite dramatically, and they need to be rebuilt even more dramatically in the future. If you look at wind, for instance, you need basically 3 times the transmission capacity to be able to get the same energy amount out, because it doesn't blow all the time. Load centers are not where the production is always. And then, again, as I said before, a company like ours is only benefiting from all these changes. But it's really a challenge for whoever needs to make these investments. I have to say, not only in fuel, transportation and distribution, but also in electricity, transmission and distribution.
But I guess you are in a unique position, having interests in both the gas turbines and the wind generation. So the challenges affect both sides of your business.
Absolutely, and we see ideas like electrolyzers out at sea, where we have these offshore wind parks. So immediately, instead of making electricity, an HVDC line to shore, people are thinking about producing hydrogen out on the platforms. But it's all very new. It's all very uncertain, and so on. A lot of things are happening.
Yeah. Interestingly, I think there was a report a week or so back that IRENA produced about exactly that issue about hydrogen production. Quite surprisingly, although everybody talks about Chile is where hydrogen is going to come from because they've got wind and solar and the perfect conditions. But the IRENA report seems to indicate that yes, they will be cheaper, but they're in Chile, which is not much use for Europe. And that the European prices, particularly North Sea wind, use exactly what you're saying, the electrolyzers offshore might end up being only maybe 30% more expensive than Chile. And although we might say more expensive than natural gas, well, at current prices, nothing like as expensive as natural gas, and probably only about 50% more than it was in the good old days, shall we say. So that would really revolutionize the entire gas supply industry.
Absolutely, and we see oil and gas companies transforming as we speak into energy companies. They've always called themselves energy companies, but now they're really starting to transform from pure oil and gas to other things like hydrogen, electricity, solar parks, wind parks, and so on and so forth. And there's a lot of interesting initiatives around the North Sea. I would say especially in the UK, with the use of salt caverns, old salt caverns as storage area for hydrogen mixed with natural gas, etc. Hydrogen produced in wind farms in the North Sea and so on. So it's an exciting time to be in the energy business these days.
Yeah, maybe I'll just continue, sorry to keep this conversation, but just the point you made about what's happening in the UK, and that is quite a different approach to decarbonising the gas supply than, for example, I think France is much more looking at biomethane injection into the network rather than the UK roadmap, which is predicated very much on hydrogen injection. Is that going to change the kind of the technology balance in different markets, or do you see it as just being another part of the puzzle?
I think everybody's looking at what is suitable here in this region, country, or whatever. and trying to optimize around that. I think we'll need all of the above to resolve the energy crisis and the decarbonization challenges.
Sorry, you wanted to
So I would like only add one example. When I read the lecture in my student year, I tried to explain how deep change in electricity will be. Yeah. Yes, okay, I understand that there will be hydrogen, renewables, everything will be on electricity. Yeah? But let's compare the density of the different sources. Yeah, if you wanted to transfer one piece of density in the pipeline in the petrol, yeah, you need this pipeline. Yeah, in the gas you need this pipeline. Yeah, in hydrogen doubled. Yeah, but if you wanted to transfer in electricity and everything will be electricity, you have this. Yeah, that means to be clear, not to be in position that everything will be produced in Germany, north or wind farm. Yeah, let's say B, it's A, it could be, but B that means that you have to double, triple the high voltage line. Yeah, if we won't be able to transfer the hydrogen together with the pipeline of natural gas. Yeah. Let's say, okay, we will construct a line for the piping line from hydrogen. Yeah, that means I fully agree that we need different solution, region per region, yeah, and maximum of electricity produced on the region. Yeah, and it's a role of cogeneration together with photovoltaic, together with small wind farm. Yeah, but to be able to produce maximum on the region, to diversify, to support this distributed regional energy systems.
Yeah, yes, sorry.
Yeah, just a little comment on this. For example, on liquid biofuels. So we are just coordinating a project, a European project. We just got granted and we started it in October, this October. And we are working with a company in the Netherlands in order to widen the possibility of waste you can use to actually manufacture, so to say, liquid biofuels. Because if you take liquid diesel, for example, with a certain type of vegetable, vegetable stuff, to be able to make it, they use fast pyrolysis, for example, to use wood waste or other type of waste in order to produce a crude oil, let's say. And then afterwards, you can also use the hydrogen to hydrogenate this liquid biofuel oil in order to create something which is lighter, and then you can easily actually transport. So this technology is quite interesting. I don't know, the potentially, the capacity in terms of manufacturing, but that's a liquid biofuel which is very easy actually to transport, which you can bring to people which are not necessarily connected to grid, and then afterwards you can burn it into a piston engine or a gas turbine or whatever, and then make it very efficient. So there will be a wide opportunities of different mixes, coming from hydrogen to ammonia as well, to liquid biofuels or to biogas. It's not only one, actually, it's many.
Maybe just a comment on that. What at least I see, there's going to be big competition for these liquid biofuels. If you take the transport sector, they're in dire need of these kind of fuels, especially the airlines, flying. Yes, electricity might work on shorter distances in our lifetimes, but for longer long-haul flights, it's going to be some sort of biofuel, I'm afraid. And then the question is, can the generation and the cogen sector compete with the airline business? That's tough, I think.
Yeah, it's quite a challenge.
Yeah.
Thanks. I understand we have some questions in the room. So we can start far left over there. I'm not sure where the microphone is.
So Gunnar Kessler from a question from Vladimír, so which I observed in the last month, and it's called throwing out the baby with the bath. And in the past few months, there was often, I heard, the discussion about, especially industrial CHP plants, to shut this thing down get an alternative fuel for the heat or just use gas, but reduce the gas consumption and just buy electricity from the grid. And if something is scarce and has a high price, I would suggest that the more efficient units will prevail and will be switched off at the very last moment, and the less efficient one will be further at the first place will be shut down. So where can we show this to policy when they discuss about this winter or next winter, that CHP engines are probably not forced to shut down in a case of a real gas scarcity situation, which so far I would say is not in the danger, it's more or less a price issue. And but nevertheless, the customers need the security that also policy understands that CHP is a high efficient solution compared to a 100% labeled gas boiler.
Yeah.
Maybe first question on this customer which shut down the CHP is a question how they conclude the contract with the gas and electricity. Yeah, I can imagine such situation that if they conclude a bad contracts on gas, they will shut down and sell the electricity. Yeah, I know this customer. Yeah, it's not about the efficiency of CHP; it's about the contracting. And what I mentioned in my speech that it's necessary to help our customer not to make a mistake. Yeah, from my point of view, it was a mistake. Yeah, they have to take care and understand the electricity market, or find a partner like a TEDOM. Yeah, to say, okay, let's take about this. Yeah, because we have a trading unit which can help our customer to buy electricity on the spot market or fixed market. Yeah, to play with this. Yeah, it's mostly about this. In this time, yeah, it's mostly about contracting gas and electricity.
Yeah, maybe to add to that, I think there is a realistic risk, and it's the risk that's driven by, not thought through or maybe well-intended and poorly executed policy interventions. And that's what we're frequently observing, and I think with every proposal that's coming at the moment from both member states, the EU as well, there are aspects in it which are not thought through. Which I think is understandable because it is extremely complex. But what I would wish for is that there is more exchange again between policy and industry, because a lot of these mistakes could actually be addressed before this legislation is implemented. And to do that, there needs to be more exchange again to reflect on what these proposals really mean, what they will result in. I think I cannot speak just for me, but for all of us, and probably for the rest of the industry players as well, that we're all very open to have these discussions, both from the associations, but also directly as players in the industry to help avoid these mistakes. Because I'm with you, it's not intended that cogen plants, which are the most efficient way of producing electricity and heat, are shut down, but it happens. We just need to look at the example in Spain. Very good example of what happens with poorly executed interventions in the energy market.
I believe during the last 20, 30 years in Europe, there has been sort of silent revolution. So while the European policy makers were distracted by other technologies and for sure other means of producing electricity and heat, the CHP technology has spread around because a lot of customers, industries, commercial companies, farmers, greenhouses, recognized the value of self-producing electricity, self-producing the heat, becoming independent from the grid. So I think it's also a matter, this sector, which is really a niche, sometimes compared to other industries in the energy business, as one advantage related to what you were saying before, that there are single entities, again, industrial, commercial, agricultural companies that would make their own interests very well. So, and if there is value, and many of the times there is value, there is no need to be subsidized, and there is no need to for policymakers to intervene. So a lot of again, companies are not throwing away the baby.
So just may I pick that up? So you're saying that despite the policy framework, the sort of the reality of the economics of cogeneration mean that people will still do it, regardless of what the theory is behind it.
Absolutely. It's the reality that, at least in Europe, we have witnessed in the last 20 years. Without a real industrial guideline related to CHP, many other industries and technologies have been also better than us as an industry to advocate and to lobby. We've been probably too weak and too small. But reality is there has been a silent revolution out there, and fortunately, again, industrial, commercial, agricultural companies have invested in CHP regardless of the existence of any policy, of any also incentive.
Any other comments?
Just your question was really referring also to the risk of being shut down in a load shedding situation. And I think this is a challenge for, we'll see what happens this winter, because there are talks about the necessity of cutting off loads, primarily maybe from the electricity grid, but maybe even from the gas grid. The thing about that, as far as I understand, and maybe someone can correct me, this is highly secret information, how those load shedding schemes work, because nobody should know what is the most critical infrastructure in this area, in this region, because then you know exactly what to attack. So I think we'll experience hopefully a mild winter, but if it's not a super mild winter, it's going to be an exciting winter. I think it's going to be very, very exciting from that perspective, because we don't know what's going to be shut down.
But although we don't know exactly what will be shut down, we can probably assume that some of the smaller schemes are less likely to be shut down because they're deeper embedded in the gas distribution network, which means that possibly the smaller CHP plants will be less vulnerable to disconnection.
When it comes to gas, you're probably right. I think that's what you hear. Electricity is a bit harder to predict what will happen.
Interesting. Do we have another question at the back?
Yeah. Like to all shout, and I have a loud voice as well. Sorry. I'm Simon Mitt from Channel Energy, and I'm coming back to the theme of this session and wondering how you formulate a strategy for your business when policy is whirring around with competing and conflicting targets and things seem to go faster and faster. There's then wars and climate change also changing the agenda all the time. How do you form a strategy for your business when you don't know what the future's going to look like even in maybe 6 months' time?
Well, thank you for that one, Simon. Anybody dare to take that one on?
I mean, at least as of now, the decarb and the crisis, war economy is pointing in the same direction, meaning make yourself less dependent on imported fuels too much. The decarbonization efforts that we had started already many years ago, the faster you can do them, the better it is. So in my mind, the strategies are aligned. The problem is what's going to happen in the really near future, when we need to do all kinds of things that has nothing to do with decarbonization. Actually fights decarbonization. Start up old coal-fired power plants and what have you. Everything that can burn should burn in order to keep Europe running and warm. So the short term, I think, is going to be more like a war economy, war strategy. But I think for the medium and long term, it's the same strategy as we had before the war even. But that's only my personal view.
Great question. I think first, after the pandemic and the war, and of course not entirely after them, there are three industries that have become, say, key in Europe, but not only in Europe: energy, pharma, and defense. And these three sectors are definitely the involuntarily winners of the last, say, 2-3 years. Energy has become, and CHP immediately after, has become a sector that merits to be noticed as national security and foreign policy. I mean, previously, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, nobody would have ever said something like this. So I think that drafting a strategy, because I think your question was more related to how our single companies are drafting strategies today. I think, at least in our case, we are doing two things. One, we try to be very close to our customers because we have a very diversified kind of customers. We have industrial companies, we have farmers, we have greenhouses, we have commercial companies in several sectors. So since we want to take a piece of their future budget in terms of energy efficiency or power generation or conversion to biomethane, we have to provide the technology, but at the same time, we want to be a sort of advisors. And so being very close to customers and hearing, especially positions that are reasonable, because I think we all have to be very careful about buzzwords. I'm obsessed with all these buzzwords out there. For example, one is climate change. My question is it possible that after these 2-3 years that we are living, the goals are exactly the same and nothing has changed? To me, that is not possible. To me, that is not possible. For example, I'll give another very short example, then I go back to the second point. Is it possible that Europe, which is a bunch of the richest country in the world, cannot be a cartel for purchasing energy? Because basically we know that demand usually drives and commands prices. I mean, what we are living today, it's the exact contrary. It means that European countries cannot be a good cartel, so we are not good buyers. Is this possible? I mean, there is a paradox here to be at the least. So, and the second point to answer your question is, I think niche markets are the answer. Of course, we have a size completely different, for example, to Siemens. So we are trying to create dedicated strategies to exploit definite niches, because you want to play different games in different markets.
Yeah, from my perspective on the strategy development, I think the first really important point is fixing the fundamentals or agreeing on the leap of faith assumptions, if you want to call them that. And that is that electrification is ongoing, so there is a growing demand for electricity. There is clearly a lot of fluctuation coming into the system, so there's a significant need for residual power, and that residual power is ideally distributed to relieve the loads on the grids. And so I think the fundamentals are all there. I think there's also a very clear agreement that there will be chemically stored energy. So yeah, at the end of the day, combusting fuels of some sort, and whether that is biogenic fuels or whether it's hydrogen in the future doesn't really matter. So I think fundamentally there's absolutely a need for distributed cogeneration units. And that's really important to start with. And then the question is, okay, what do we do with that? And from my perspective, that is adapting to the new fuels. So that's driving hydrogen development forward so that we make sure that every asset that's installed today can be retrofitted to hydrogen. And we've demonstrated that already. Others in the industry, 2G for example, are doing that. And I think that's really important because it emphasizes the readiness of our industry for the future. And from my perspective, that's the key point of strategy, is really that following that path to decarbonization, making sure that we are ready for it. And then I'm convinced that sooner or later, and hopefully sooner, because it will save all of us from a lot of blackouts, the investments into that residual power will happen. But because the fundamental need for it is there, I'm very convinced that it will happen sooner or later.
Thank you. I think if I understood the question correctly, Simon, was it really also about maybe readdressing the balance in the energy trilemma between affordability, security, supply, and climate change? That maybe we focused a bit obsessively on climate change, not that we shouldn't, but that we've not focused on the other two parts of it, which are affordability and security supply, and that maybe the war is unfortunate, but a necessary evil to refocus our attention on the other two parts of the energy trilemma.
I think it's been important to rebalance a bit. I still think climate change is an ultimate existential crisis that we face. But when I look at what's been going on in Brussels in terms of policy making, it's sort of been a black and white process a lot of the time, and that black and white process is different depending on which bit of the Commission has produced it. And we heard Hans earlier talking about there's a great story, but the reality of what they've got in place is actually quite different from what he was portraying. And you've got competing things. So you're told you can't put combustion plants into houses any longer because it's got to be a heat pump, but you've got no grid to do that. And. You know, so it's really difficult, I think, to steer through this. Right? The messages are not clear enough from us. I think we're guilty of part of that. But actually, we need to work out how we deliver this with, you know, and in a way, the Russian-induced crisis here has helped focus the fact that energy is not a cheap thing. But I'm not sure I'm not sure I've got in my head the answer to that approach.
Do we have? Yes.
Okay, without mic. Marco Olinelli, COGEN. Let me be a bit provocative, because we learned about good businesses, silent revolution, 2 years return of investment. So what are you asking to COGEN Europe, or what are you asking to Europe? Because otherwise, if it's an extremely good market to be in, I mean, then there's no reason to be here.
I really know what I'm asking for politicians in Europe. Yeah? Not to disturb the market, keep the market at ease, not to make some prediction about the technology, because I don't know if it will be the e-mobility or hydrogen. Let's keep the market as is. Yeah, only small regulation. Yeah, but over regulation, what we can see just now. But in the end, nothing happens. Yeah, we are over dependence in one case from Russia in some part of Europe. Yeah, and if we will construct new possibilities how to supply, it will be stabilized. what I'm asking for our politician, to be a little bit conservative, not to make decisions just now about the technology and prescribe the technology, and think twice before the writing down some legislation. Is my wish.
Very interesting question. In the US nowadays, there are companies that can benefit from a grant on the capex of CHP as high as 80%. So I think this can be a concrete way, of course, maybe not as high as 80%, but to give you a sense of what certain policymakers are doing to accelerate the use of CHP, because especially the decentralized way of deploying our technology is, as you well know, is a winning point. And then there is another, maybe more macroeconomic point of view to answer your question. There is, and I have more an answer than a question. That is, how is it possible to regulate the energy market in Europe if there is no discussion, at least for my knowledge, of what is the industrial strategy for Europe in the next, say, 20, 30 years? Are we continuing to import textile from China? Are we continuing to import toys from China? Are we continuing to import batteries from China? So what are the industries that we want to foster, we want to have here on a European ground? How energy can be detached from an industrial policy? So to me, COGEN Europe probably has to give an answer to these two kind of things from his angle, of course.
Yeah, I would say there's a couple of asks. One, keep a level playing field between the technologies. So technology agnostic ramp up or transition to new fuels. That's very important from my perspective. Then the topic of remove regulatory or planning phase obstacles that are really delaying investments and installations at the moment. I think that's a really key point, because otherwise it's just slowing down the process of building out residual power too much. And then the third one, avoid having interventions in the market that lead to undesired results by not having thought them through, the point that I made earlier. I think that's a really key one, really understanding the system to the end and being more open to discuss the impacts of decisions with associations in industry again. I think that's a system that has worked well in the past, but what I observed over the last years is policy more and more withdrawing into their own chambers, trying to avoid the exchange with industry, because it always has this image of being lobbyist influence, and I think that's not really the case. I think there's a lot of really just valuable thoughts that should be exchanged, and really far from just reflecting own interests, but really just having an open discussion. That would be my ask.
To Michel, be waiting patiently.
Well, I said that there are lots of opportunities actually. I don't know if it's going to be great business, I hope so. But for example, in our region, which is the Bologna region, so here in West London, so in Bologna, which is the other part, for example, there is no more any incentive for CHP. It's dead. So it was based on something called green certificate. So each time you would produce electricity with CHP, you would have a green certificate. But basically, this year, for example, they have decreased dramatically the amount of green certificates. The only one you can still get is essentially for, I think, wind power or something like this. So it's kind of strange, in fact, and COGEN Europe already can play a role there, is that when I heard the principal advisor, Mr. Van der Steen, say, yeah, cogeneration is very important for Europe and so on, but from a regional level, for example, is that? So then there is no contribution. And having these incentives is very important actually to create a business, especially for small systems. Maybe for large systems not that much, but for small systems it is. So if we want to penetrate the small systems market, which is huge, then in that case you need to keep some sort of incentives. But so I hope that somehow actually there will be translation of what the European Commission wants at the high level to the regional level where we are basically playing.
I don't think that the fact that business is good, at least for many companies in the energy business, relieves us from the responsibility to be really in the policy making as much as we possibly can as an association, especially in these times when things are changing so fast. I agree with Carl that we need to seek contact with policy-making bodies because I've seen the same thing, that they're retracting back into their own dungeons and coming out with something that is very hard then to influence. So I think that's the primary task of COGEN Europe as well.
If I may reply to my question, I would say that COGEN has to have the voice louder, and Europe has to listen to us. That should be the way.
I think you have an open audience here. Is there another question from the audience? One back over there.
Alex, microphone. Can you hear me?
Yeah, very well.
Okay. My name is Thomas Rücker from Company and Progress. My question is quite strategic, but I'm really curious about that. We've learned that many companies, OEMs and packages, are starting, let's say, side business, AB going to methane production, Wärtsilä going to methane production, and energy solutions, hydrogen production. TEDOM says they need to offer larger scope of supply with larger power plants and integration. So I was wondering if a successful future company in this business is not only a prime mover supplier, but also maybe involved in fuel supply, involved in combining with solar, maybe virtual power plant, maybe even selling energy, like becoming like a real super company who's involved in the complete supply chain. This I was wondering if this is the maybe future strategy to be successful.
So this is the kind of energy as a service type solution.
Exactly.
Anybody like to comment on that?
We have just decided to continue to be an industrial company, again with the engineering and maintenance capabilities. Half of our install base is in biogas, so if the market trend goes as if it is going toward the upgrading instead of the electrification of the biogas, we decided to produce a system, a package system that can upgrade the biogas into biomethane. So for us it's been, not easy, I would say, but consequential kind of strategy, if you will.
I would say the important part is really being able to add value, and the value of integrating, for example, an engine-based CHP plant with a PV plant. I don't really see a huge value in the integration of the two. That's because it would mean that as supplier for the CHP plant, if you then also install the PV plant, you somehow have to add a margin on the PV plant that you're passing through. And the question is, are you worth that markup? Yeah, and the value in the markup or that you generate to be able to request that markup somehow needs to lie in the integration. And that's why I have difficulties in seeing how the value of integrating, for example, PV and a CHP plant really is. I think there's a lot of value in integrating the controls because the flexible part of the generation typically is the CHP unit, and so it makes sense to integrate controls also for other generating sources, be it PV, be it a battery storage. That absolutely makes sense. That's what we're doing. But just integrating other generation assets, I think, is of limited value. And then to the question, energy as a service, I think there's certainly fields where, with a future more flexible CHP, some of the traditional CHP users find it more difficult to make that step into generate or investing into their own generation. I think that's certainly a topic because it's becoming more a focus of energy producer than just a form of supplying your heat supply for your industrial processes. So with that additional need for flexibility, probably some energy as a service models will evolve. I'm not sure whether it's a good idea to play in these segments as an OEM, because it means you're then starting to go into competition with your customers. Yeah. And that's typically not a good idea.
Yeah.
But these are my thoughts.
Great answer.
I totally agree with the last couple of statements. I have nothing to add.
Sorry, so just maybe to interrupt to confirm. So what you seem to be saying is that there is a rationale for integrating the supply of energy as a service, but that is not a role for an OEM. That your role is to specialize and optimize your production, your development of the hardware, and then somebody else does the integration and pulls all that together.
Yeah, I think we've seen in traditional business for many decades that we have something called IPPs. They can be big and they can be small. They are independent power producers, and they buy equipment and systems and solutions from many different vendors. Over the decades, I've seen many attempts to integrate and becoming sort of an IPP, but also have all the OEM equipment. And I totally agree here that then you end up competing with your own customers, and it also turns out that maybe we are not the best from Siemens to run power production in Thailand. Maybe there are Thai IPPs that know exactly what to do to win the contracts and which strings to pull and where is the profit pools, etc. That's the conclusion we are at the moment, at least.
You might take a slightly different view.
So I have the same view of only one remark. There is no universal answer. Country per country, it will be different. Customer per customer, it will be different. Only one universal answer should be that you have to know the customer, you have to know the legislation in your country or country of your interest, and try to find the best for the customer, because CHP is an excellent fundamental. And to understand what should be advantages in this region for customer, it should be a future of your business. This is no issue.
Sorry, I thought we were going to. Okay. Did we have another question? I thought there was one. Okay, well, we are coming to the end of the session anyway, so I guess we could almost summarize what's been said so far in terms of it's a very challenging, but it's also a very positive environment at the moment, and that, it's going to be painful for industry and for the public generally, for consumers. But that acts as an incentive. And interestingly, people have talked about the war, and historically people have talked about a war situation or a war economy, which has driven innovation. And I just wondered whether in the context of what we're seeing now, metaphorically people have talked about the climate, the war on climate change and so on. But now we've got an actual war, which is stimulating change. I wonder if you'd each like to maybe just make a brief comment in terms of how you see your role in this wartime crisis.
Well, I don't really think that this war is driving a lot of innovation on the energy sector. That's my perspective. What I rather see is that it's basically pushing us back to rely on old technologies such as coal. So there, I'm not so positive on it driving innovation. What's our role in it? I think. So what's our role in it? Very clearly, the role of efficiency. I think in this time of crisis, it's a time where we cannot afford to not use CHP, where we cannot afford to just let waste heat disseminate into the air. I think that's the one thing that's probably important.
I think CHP is going to be recognized as one of the technology that can driven and accelerate the change at the European level. Then we can discuss about other geographies, but certainly maybe with different fuels. Before Mr. Van Steen told us that natural gas continues to be the main source for COGEN in Europe. So maybe also using different fuels, but I believe in the next 20 years we will see an acceleration in the use of CHP, and not because, unfortunately, not because policymakers are going to pave our road ahead, but because single customers, companies will choose this technology, which is really a winning one.
I'd like to draw a parallel to the pandemic. Over those 2 years, we were fast forwarding the use of IT tools to work together. And some say that it's at least a 10-year jump. It would have taken at least 10 years to assume the same way of openly using what have you, Skype and Teams and all these AR and all these nice things. But we had to do it because there was no other way. I think the war and the climate change is going to be the same, especially in Europe, the war. We're just forced to do other things than we've done in the last 20 years. And not that much more, maybe innovation, but we need to do what we knew we should have done already, but faster.
So what can I add? At first concentrate to solve the problem with dependence on Russian gas. And this is solving this problem. We will have a chance to go to and thinking about security of supply of farm resources. And one of the possible solution of this problem is so-called using the private resources what we have in place. It's biogas, it's sewage gas, it should be the landscape gas. Use everything what we have just now. And one of the topic of this is small distributed energy, which produce independent electricity on the region. And it needs IT solution, it needs engine for oil gas. And again, it should be this skip, not to wait too long, and just now electricity will be in a higher price, gas will be a higher price, and just now we will use this CHP with another gas, CHP in system, CHP in local, and I think it's some advantages of this war, if I can say it this way.
Yes, lots has been said, so at least, I would not say that there are advantages, of this war, so I think it's a tremendous big problem. So for us, it's just that we want to do as much as we can and all our best to decrease the burden on our potential customers or future customers, bring them some good technology, and at the same time try to work on the emissions, so converting chemical fuels into energy with the least possible emissions, so that we are at the same time basically reducing the burden of the climate. That's what we are intending to do.
Thank you. So I think that maybe we sum up by addressing the question that was asked about the need for COGEN Europe almost. And I think that what we've shown is that cogeneration has a key role to play in supporting all three objectives of the energy trilemma, of overcoming the recovery after the pandemic, which has been compounded by the war in Ukraine. And I guess the request of the policymakers is to listen to people who have the experience and the understanding of the technologies and the joined up parts that we've talked about a lot about, system integration, about maximising the use of local resources, not wasting anything and certainly not throwing out the baby with the bathwater. So I think that maybe the key message to, if there's anybody from the Commission still here, to please engage with us to gain from the experience and the knowledge that the members have. So with that, I'd like to thank the members on the panel for your valuable contributions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.